Hi, I'm Adam Strom. I'm the Executive Director of Reimagining Migration. Thank you so much for joining us for this short webinar to introduce you to part of Reimagining Migration's pedagogy as part of an ongoing series of on-demand professional development experiences. This webinar, as you know, is 5 steps for creating welcoming and inclusive learning communities. And so I'll walk you through some big ideas and give you some examples of classroom practice as we go through. If this is your first experience with reimagining migration, I thought I'd just share with you that our mission is to advance the education and well-being of immigrant origin youth, decrease bias and hatred against young people of diverse origins, and help rising generations develop the understanding and really empathy necessary to build and sustain welcoming and inclusive communities. The bottom line is that we believe that every student has a right to an inclusive education where all young people, regardless of their migration histories and experiences, feel a sense of belonging. All right, so that's who we are. And let's jump right in. And the work here today is really coming from research that's done by members of the Reimagining Migration team. A lot of it is actually from groundbreaking research from Carola and Marcelo Suarez Orozco, but also from Veronica Bois-Mancia and myself. So step number one, and really fundamentally, is you need to start to build trusting relationships with young people. It's important to recognize that you need to know your students, not just as learners, but really as people, right? Learn about the communities where your students come from. And especially if you're teaching immigrant students or newcomers from anywhere, learn about the migration stories that shape the world in which they live and shape their particular experiences. I invite students really to share their stories of movement and migration. How did they get here? And this will help create a shared understanding in a community. So why is this important? I mean, there's lots of reasons, but feeling respected, valued by adults is really central for student engagement and motivation, right? Kids want to be liked, they want to be respected by their educators, and people who feel a stronger sense of belonging are less likely to experience stress and really report increased physical and emotional health, both outside of school but inside it as well. One thing that we like to do as an exercise in our classrooms is really help students map the ecology of their lives. And by that, we start to think about, if you put the student in the middle of a world, right, and start to think about who are they, it's important to recognize that our identities are not actually everything about us, right? Our identities are always mediated by the world that surrounds us. So if you put the student in the middle, what do we know about their family, their peers, their neighborhood, their walk to school even, right? What's going on in the world around them, right? What are they seeing in media? What's going on in politics? What are the policies? What are the families' status, right? Are they families that are, moving from a green card to citizenship? Are they applying for asylum status? Who are these kids, and how are those issues impacting their lives? And what are the cultural traditions, not only that they bring with them, but also the cultural traditions of the communities in which they're moving, the economic conditions, right, that shape opportunity for both the parents and the families. And for our kids, what's the historical context of the places in which we're living, and the patterns of inclusion and exclusion within those communities, because all of these factors, from a very tightly to maybe more generalized, impact kids' lives. One thing that we love, again, to do with students is to encourage them to share their stories. And we have this organized in a really nice protocol that you can download from our website called Moving Stories. And the routine offers questions and has young people interview each other. It builds community, it builds understanding, it builds empathy, and also starts to make perspective taking visible, right? Because all of us have our own perspectives that are shaped by our experiences and our family experiences. So step two, if step one was make sure you know your kids, right, and building trusting relationships. Step two is ensure safety and inclusion. And that means doing some mapping of what's going on in your schools. Identify who are the in and out groups at school, and then the ways that the different communities within your school define who is a we and who's a they. And this is particularly important. Notice the way that the students and the faculty talk about and respond to immigrants and the people who are perceived as newcomers. It was a real issue, both in the schools that I've attended, but in the schools that I've taught in as well. And that means that sometimes you're going to have to intervene to support those that are targeted by discriminatory language and behavior when it's necessary. And so this is not a side issue, actually. Students from marginalized backgrounds are actually at a real greater risk of feeling like they don't belong. They're more likely to be targeted by discrimination. A study from UCLA found that 82% of administrators in US schools reported that actually they'd heard students make discriminatory remarks about kids from other racial and ethnic groups. When we look at immigration, it's actually interesting. Very, very few schools actually communicate about the need to tolerate or even respect immigrant students. Only 36% of white majority schools openly talk about the need to tolerate or respect immigrant youth. Those messages matter. They matter to immigrant kids and the children of immigrants, but it also matters to the rest of the community because, again, it sends a signal of who belongs and who doesn't. And actually less than half of the schools in this country are doing any professional development around these issues. So we also suggest it's useful to survey students and staff around issues of inclusion and belonging, around issues of representation in the curriculum and the school community. I mean, it's so important for young people to see themselves, right? And then for people also to see diverse representatives, right? We're living in a world that is increasingly diverse. It's important to see people modeled and learn about the experiences of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, whether they're ours or another one. So have students speak about representation. When do they see themselves? And around issues of bullying and harassment. One of the issues that we see coming up a lot actually is what happens to kids who are bilingual and what happens when they speak a second language in the school, right? Their home language. How are both the adults and their peers responding to them? Again, language is so central to people's identities. So what does it mean when it's shut down? So therefore, again, is related to the last point. Make diversity visible. And that means embracing and honoring the diversity of languages in your school buildings. Do you actually even know how many languages are spoken in your schools? Most of us don't. Do we know the variety of identities and cultures and family practices in our school and community? And do we celebrate them and make them visible, right? And one way to do that is to think about the school rituals that we have, right? What are the daily routines and the rhetoric we use? Does it honor and value those diversities, right? And so think about, when are we displaying messages of inclusion in the hallway, in the public spaces, in our classroom? Again, who sees themselves? How do people who are not members of those groups see people from marginalized groups represented? Are we sending a message, right? We're all living in times of demographic change, and we can't make the assumption that our classroom should look like they did 30 years ago, right? In terms of both the books in the classroom, but the posters on the wall, the way that we celebrate holidays and cultures within our school community. So one thing we've done is we've created a culturally responsive teaching checklist. It's, again, downloadable from our website. And you can use that to think about both your curriculum, but also, again, these broader habits within the school community. And one thing that we are paying particular attention to isn't just whether there's diverse voices represented, but how are we using them? Or do they feel like they're token, or do they see that they're additive and actually helping build people's understanding? Do we use these stories of our diverse population to something that we should all be learning from? Or again, is this considered just a side issue? So the culturally responsive teaching checklist can help you think about some of those issues. And then it's also important to set high expectations and deepen learning opportunities. I taught a young woman from Brazil once who told me, in Brazil, I was studying philosophy, and here in this class, because I'm an English language learner, they're giving me Jack and Jill books. And she was so upset. She said, I am a smart person, but they're not treating me like we're smart. So build upon the language and the knowledge that our young people bring with them to the classroom. Don't just say, oh, well, they're struggling with English, so they're not smart. That is a common and a dangerous misconception. So how do we incorporate thinking routines that build lifelong habits of some really core academic skills, perspective taking, inquiry skills, help people recognize inequities and help them take action and speak across differences to nurture inclusive communities. Teach about immigration, right? It's one of the things that's often like in the background. So how do we actually make this stuff visible? Because when demographic change is happening, we know that it makes people uncomfortable. So use this as a way to deepen expectations and deepen learning opportunities, right? And encourage reflection around the civic issues that are connected to migration. Because again, when you just ignore this stuff, you lose the opportunity to help young people think about how they can be bridge builders across divide. Young immigrant origin students are often the bridge builders between their parents and the larger communities. But I think kids would also like to think of, who are not newcomers, would like to think about what their role is in this changing world. And recognize again that the children of immigrants are more than English learners, and therefore the academic content needs to be challenging. Think about how do we bring in social and emotional teaching in our thinking routines. Again, very important for kids who are marginalized. So we have a free guide that you can download to start to model simple practices that are easy to incorporate in your classroom. We've identified academic dispositions to deepen knowledge and learning. Our learning arc is really based on this idea that when you teach about migration, you're actually giving people a window into the larger human experience. And again, I talked about some of these civic stories. So what do we teach in civics? Are we honoring the diverse stories of our country's history that have actually helped change our ideas about democracy and inclusion and exclusion? There's a wonderful radio piece I love teaching called The Dream Nine from Latino USA about the Dreamer movement, or one of my other favorite civic stories is the stories of a protest on the Texas Capitol led by 15 young women wearing quinceañeras, called Quinceañeras at the Capitol, and really, really powerful models of how young people who we typically think of as from marginalized communities can actually become really important civic actors on the world stage. And then lastly, the final step is really the beginning of the step, is you got to recognize that learning and growing in times of change is just normal, it's natural, it happens all the time. So think about how are you going to prepare yourself and your colleagues to support the social and emotional and academic needs of all of your students. Because look, immigrant origin kids are 27% of the school age population. They're growing. We are in a time of turbulence. How are you as an educator going to go bring out your best self, your best habits, and think about challenging all these young people? So if I spoke fast, you can download the slide deck underneath the video, and you can download any of the material that I referenced here in the webinar. Thank you so much for attending. There are many, many more of these webinars that you can find on our website. So for more information and to access additional resources, go to our website, reimaginingmigration.org. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.